for the safety, honor, and welfare of your people. All this we ask in the name of Jesus, Christ our Lord. Amen.
Senate is now in session.
I'm going to put it from up here. We're practicing distancing, so. Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Announcements by Your Honor the Acting President. Presentation of petitions. Announcements, yeah.
Just wanted to inform the Senate that the President, His Honor Senator Dr. Sir Richard Cheltenham, will not be with us today. Neither will Senator Monique Tate, and those are the persons from whom we've had correspondence.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Mr. President, I'm commanded to lay the following documents. One, the audited financial statements of the Board of Management of the Lester Vaughan School for the financial year ended March the 31st, 2012. The Director's Report and audited financial statement of the Barbados Conference Services Limited for the financial year ended March the 31st, 2018. And 3, the loan contract number 4987/OCBA between the Government of Barbados and the Inter-American Development Bank Sustainable Development Policy Program.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate and moved by minister.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 22-1 and 45-2 for the remainder of today's sitting to allow us to complete our work.
The question is that Standing Orders 22-1 and 45-2 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting. Honourable members in favour of that, please say yea. Those against, no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Senator Nurse be appointed the temporary chairman of committee for today's sitting.
The question is that Senator Nurse be appointed as temporary chairman for the remainder of today's sitting. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senator Nurse appointed chairman for the remainder of the sitting.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice and move the first reading of the following bills. The Emergency Management Amendment Bill 2020 and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Amendment Bill 2020.
The question is that the Emergency Management Amendment Bill 2020 and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Amendment Bill 2020 be both read a first time. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Public business. Order number 3. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Emergency Management Amendment Bill 2020.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I rise this evening, this Friday evening, at minutes to 4. I know, Mr. President, you would appreciate, and all honourable members, and indeed Barbados, the importance and seriousness of the bill before this Honourable Chamber for it to be dealt with at this time of the evening on a Friday evening because of the seriousness and importance of it. I believe, Mr. President, 3 days ago when I spoke in this Honourable Chamber, I mentioned that we would have to come back shortly. At that time I said perhaps Monday, perhaps sometime next week. But certainly circumstances have made it quite important that we come this week, and indeed today, to address this matter of the emergency management and providing those powers. I think all members, sir, are aware of the issues surrounding COVID-19, and it's not my intention certainly this evening to go over that and the issues confronting us. To suffice it to say that in Barbados we developed quite early a COVID preparedness plan in which it outlined stages 0, 1, 2, 3, and in each of those stages it was triggered in terms of, I believe stage 1 triggered it with our first case, and we have moved along. We are now into stage 3. Just at the beginning of stage 3, we have now, yesterday, 24 cases, and additionally 2 cases today. We have 20, which were confirmed last night, or early this morning, 26 cases. So we have passed that basic threshold of 25 cases. I think the Honourable Prime Minister would have spoken, and indeed the Minister of Health, in various places before in terms of the necessary triggers, and they had mentioned that 25 would be a trigger, and they also mentioned other cases in terms of community spread, which we have no direct proof as yet in Barbados, and they mentioned another trigger would be where it's widespread in the community. Thankfully, it is not widespread in community at this point in time, and so we have taken the precaution of moving. We are ahead of in terms, some people would describe that we're being overcautious. We are moving ahead as though it was widespread in the community, recognizing that there's always that potential, bearing in mind that in some cases it is asymptomatic and persons might be carrying it and don't know. It is always the intention in terms of containing COVID, preventing transmission, and of course by doing that to prevent spread of the disease. And so in this situation we think it is necessary, absolutely necessary, to amend the Emergency Management Act so as to declare a public health emergency, which I think all of us recognize is what we are faced with at this point in time. The proposed act, the bill gives a definition in terms of a public emergency, and it speaks to various definitions in terms of what is a notifiable disease and defines a public health emergency. It speaks to where the Governor General and under the Principal Act is amended under Section 3, insertion of Section 28A into the Principal Act, and this will speak now with reference to the Governor General, which the Governor General is satisfied that an emergency has arisen as a result of a person or animal having a communicable disease or notifiable disease. And the amendments are fairly straightforward, but I think in terms of the actual act, the importance is attached to the Emergency Management COVID-19 Order 2020, which will accompany the Act. And this will be signed by the Cabinet Secretary. And I believe this will be done as soon as this bill has been passed through this Honourable Chamber. The orders gets into the detail in terms of what will be done and the consequences within the Act. It gives certain definitions. It speaks to quarantine and how persons will be allowed where a public health officer has reasonable grounds to believe that a person has been exposed to another person who is or may be infected with COVID-19, the public health officer shall order this person to either quarantine himself for 14 days or be sent to a quarantine station. And it speaks to the importance of the chief medical officer and the role of the chief medical officer in all of this. It also speaks to the imposition of restrictions and requirements as it relates to this quarantine process and the assessments that are done, the history that is taken in terms of why the person should be quarantined. And it certainly then addresses also the isolation of persons who are suspected to be infected with COVID-19. It speaks of the screening requirements, and it says that the person who is being screened should answer questions about his or her health or other relevant circumstances, including the travel history and of information about other individuals with whom that person may have been in contact. It could ask the person to produce any documents which may assist a public health officer in assessing the person's health. Can allow a public health officer or such person designated by the public health officer to take a biological sample from the person, including a sample of the person's respiratory secretions or blood by appropriate means, including by swabbing the person's nasopharyngeal cavity, and provide sufficient information to enable the person to be immediately contacted by a public health officer during such period as the public health officer may specify. So it is quite detailed in terms of what can be done in terms of the powers. It speaks about the power in terms of requisitioning of lands and buildings, and in terms of an authorized person may by notice in writing in the form set out in the schedule requisition any lands or buildings and this is by any person by virtue may be used for such purposes and in such manner as he thinks fit, and this may be done in terms of providing for quarantine facilities and stuff like that. It speaks to in terms also in transport and authorizing and certain forms of transport to transport persons to the quarantine facilities, isolation facilities, and it also addresses the issue of provision of supplies and etc. for these places. It speaks to miscellaneous controls, recognizing that in Barbados and in other countries where persons have been panicking and there's been long lines in supermarkets, we need to maintain controls in terms of supplies in the country, and the Prime Minister, virtue by this order, may by directive to maintain, control, or regulate the supply of goods and services so as to secure a sufficiency of those goods and services that are essential to the well-being of the community, and to provide for the equitable distribution of those goods and services, and ensure the availability of those goods and services at fair prices. So the order allows the Prime Minister to do this, to regulate exports and imports in a manner calculated to serve the interests of the community, to ensure generally that the resources available to the community are used in a manner calculated to serve the interests of the community, and to prohibit the importation or exportation of goods of any class or description of goods from any or to any country. Prime Minister will also, by the virtue of this order, have the power to regulate the distribution, purchase, or sale of goods of any class or description of goods, and to control and regulate the prices at which goods or any class or description of goods may be sold, whether by wholesale or retail. And it speaks about persons failing to comply with these directives being liable on summary conviction to a fine of $100,000 or imprisonment for 1 year or both. There are certain reporting requirements, and the Chief Medical Officer shall report to the Prime Minister for the duration of this public health emergency at the time determined by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, on the advice of the Chief Medical Officer, may, by virtue of this order, direct the prohibition of events in Barbados, or particular areas in Barbados, may the prohibition of the assembly of 2 or more persons in a public place in any area specified, and direct an individual to confine himself to his residence or to a particular area in the interests of public health. Where the Prime Minister, on the advice of the Chief Medical Officer, advises the confinement of individuals pursuant to the above paragraph, You may require the closure of all educational, which has been done already, or religious institutions in the area so specified, and require the closure of any business or organization that caters to the general public in the area so specified, unless permitted by otherwise by this order. Section 15 of the orders deals with curfew, and I believe that is the area of most interest to individuals and most concern. And it states quite clearly that the Prime Minister, on the advice of the Chief Medical Officer, may, by virtue of this order, issue a directive requiring every person within any area specified in the directive to remain indoors between such hours as may be specified, and any person who is or remains outdoors between such hours without reasonable explanation is guilty of an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $50,000 or to imprisonment for a term of 1 year or both. Of course, this shall not apply, and I will speak to persons described as essential services. And the paragraph says that essential services means A, medical professionals, paramedical professionals, nurses, staff of pharmaceutical agencies, staff of hospitals, clinics and pharmacies, persons employed or engaged as caregivers, law enforcement officers, defense force officers, customs officers, prison services, security services, disaster management services, and firefighting services. The provision of electricity, telecommunications, media, and broadcasting services is all included. The provision of transport services, whether by aircraft, by ship, by car, or public service vehicles. The operation of the airport and the seaport. The collection, storage, purification, or distribution of water for use by the public or any section of the public. The collection, storage, treatment, and disposal of sewage, garbage, or refuse, and the removal, handling, or burial of deceased persons or disposal of dead animals. These are all considered as being essential. And the Prime Minister or the Minister with responsibility for the police may by virtue of this order issue a directive requiring a person who is not delivering essential services to be exempt from a directive issued pursuant to this subparagraph. And I know that the calling programs have been ablaze, and there have been several calls. I believe in a perfect world, everyone would desire an exemption. And that would indeed be defeating the purpose. Because the purpose is to ensure that people stay primarily at home in an effort to contain, as I said earlier, the possible spread of COVID-19. And if we are going to introduce orders and then we are going to, for everyone, give an exemption, then we defeat our purpose. In other words, we'll be telling people to be quarantined for a period of time, and everyone will feel that life is normal, that they will just be continuing to do what they're accustomed doing. And I think it has to be made clear. When I come to the directives, I believe people will understand that it's not a situation where essentially you stay in your house from 8 to 6 in the morning, and between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. you continue as though everything was normal. That is not the intention. Certainly not the intention of the government. And that is not how you will control the spread in terms of a pandemic. But I will come to that. Suffice it to say that exemptions will be made. Obviously, some persons and some entities will provide good cases in terms of what should be covered and what should be exempted, and they will be given due consideration. I should say that in Section 17, it speaks to obstruction, and a person who obstructs the Chief Medical Officer, a public health officer, a member of the Royal Barbados Police Force, a member of the Defense Force, or a fire service officer acting in the course of his duty or exercising any powers or performing any duties conferred or imposed on him by this order is guilty of an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $50,000 or to imprisonment for a term of 1 year or indeed both. And that deals with the orders. Mr. President, I come to the directives. And these, of course, accompany the order and the directives. All honourable members know that a curfew will be imposed throughout Barbados from the 28th of March 2020 to the 14th of April 2020 between the hours of 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. From the 28th of March 2020 to the 14th of April 2020, every non-essential service shall remain closed except the following, which may open only between the hours specified. It speaks of abattoirs, butchers, shops, and fish markets between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. And I think this is clear. People have to eat, and persons will need to go to the abattoir to slaughter animals, and indeed butchers, shops, and fish markets, especially in this season of Lent and Easter approaching. They will be allowed to be open between 8 and 5 p.m. This is not, when I give these ranges, it is not saying that these are the times for which these entities will be open, but they can be open within these time periods. Bakeries between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Farms, because farmers get up early, between 5 a.m. and 6 p.m. Pharmaceutical manufacturers, manufacturers of juices, soft drinks and dairy products, food processors and food distributors between 8 and 5 p.m. Banks, credit unions, and other financial institutions, excluding insurance companies, between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Cleaning services between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. I know some people will say that these people normally operate at night, but with several of the places that they clean will be closed for business, certainly it is anticipated that they will move quite early in the morning to do some of their work before the banks, etc., are open. Restaurants for drive-through and takeaway services only. I know the Honourable Senator saw a restaurant with 4 people sitting down there eating earlier. That is that is now, but after Saturday, that will not be allowed. But for restaurants for drive-through and takeaway services, only between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. Fuel manufacturers, fuel storage facilities, and fuel distributors will be allowed to be open between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. And you might ask, why 5 p.m., why 6 p.m.? Because you recognize that people need at least 2 to 3 hours to get home so that they're home before 8 p.m. Wholesale, retail, grocery stores, mini-marts, and village shops. And for my comrade on the other side, including rum shops, between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Gasoline stations between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Delivery services, and there are a lot of people who are advertising already in terms of delivering groceries, delivering medical supplies, delivering meals. These will be allowed to function between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Hotels, villas, and other rental accommodation, they can function, but they will have to exclude their gaming rooms. They will have to close their spas, their gyms, and the discotheques and restaurants, except again for takeaway service and room service for the entire day. I've been told there's one operating sugar factory, and this will be allowed to operate for the entire day. And of course, the private vet services will continue as needed, because I know persons would want to have those services throughout the day. As it applies to government ministries and departments and statutory corporations, generally these will be open between 9 and 2. And in the public sector, they've been advised to look at the possibilities of using the technology and working from home. 9 to 2, I believe, perhaps the trade unionists on the other side would ask if I meant including lunch or excluding lunch. 9 to 2 inclusive of their lunch hour. These are the agencies and entities that will be open. The Office of the Attorney General, the Registrar of the Supreme Court, and the Department of Public Prosecutions. The National Assistance Board, the Child Care Board, the Welfare Department, obviously the Health Laboratory, the National Disabilities Unit, the National Insurance Department, the Treasury, the Central Bank, the General Post Office, Civil Aviation Department, Cabinet Office, Prime Minister's Office, the Ministry of the Public Service, the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, the Ministry of Information, Broadcasting and Public Affairs, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, the Commerce Department, the Barbados Tourism Management, Inc., Central Purchasing, the Barbados Meteorological Services, the Barbados Statistical Department, the Barbados Revenue Authority, the Barbados Licensing Authority, the Urban Development Commission, the Rural Development Commission, the Barbados Agriculture Development and Marketing Corporation, the Barbados Agricultural Marketing Company. Of course, the Ministry of Agriculture's Plant Quarantine and Veterinary Services will work as needed. The owner or operator of every business establishment would be expected to restrict the number of persons within or outside that establishment at any one time in order to ensure that a distance of at least 6 feet is maintained between every person. I know this might be difficult, but we're asking persons and indeed entities to try to abide by this. Of course, in all of this, we're not speaking of those persons who run their businesses from home, who have businesses that operate at home, but we'll expect them to maintain the distances that we have been pushing. Except for the conduct of funeral services and weddings, all churches and places of religious worship, including mosques and synagogues, will be closed. No person shall host or attend a private party, a recreational or competitive sporting event, a wedding other than the bride, the bridegroom, official witnesses, and the marriage officer, a banquet or ball or reception, any social event, a meeting of a fraternity society, private or social club, or civic association and organization. And I know some members of this honorable chamber belong to some of these fraternal societies. No person shall visit any place of quarantine or an isolation station. No person shall visit a prison or the government industrial school. Those public officers whose presence in the office is not designated as essential to the present level of operation of these government offices shall work from their homes. Private businesses and offices may only continue their operations where the employees can work exclusively from their homes. And this, of course, excludes the ones I mentioned earlier. Coming back to funerals, it is felt that no more than 10 mourners, one officiant, and the funeral director and the necessary staff shall attend a funeral. No more than one person at any time should visit a patient in the hospital and the nursing home facilities, or facilities for treatment of persons with addiction or dependency on drugs or narcotic substances. And subject to the provision of this directive, every person shall remain in the confines of his home and its curtilage during this period. A person who contravenes this directive without reasonable explanation is guilty of an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $50,000 or to imprisonment for a term of 1 year or both, pursuant to paragraph 15.1 of the Emergency Management of COVID-19 Order 2020. Mr. President, to some, these measures might seem very harsh, but we are looking at the total, the health of all Barbadians. And we believe it is too important to ensure the safety and protection of Barbadians from COVID-19, recognizing the devastation that we see in terms of the number of persons who are dying daily by the thousands in countries across the globe. We believe that we now have 26 cases. I believe out of 200 and about 40 persons who have been tested. We believe that we, by introducing these measures, can contain this virus, and in so doing, reduce the transmission and obviously the spread of the disease. Sometimes sacrifices are necessary. Years ago, Mr. President, when I was doing orthopedics, there was a surgeon, this consultant who I was learning orthopedics with, who always had his adage, young Walcott, and I know Senator Maynard remembers who I'm speaking about, sometimes you have to break eggs to make omelette. In other words, sometimes you have to destroy, you have to create. He would also sometimes, which I wouldn't say in here, I know Senator Maynard would know what I'm talking about, that in other words, to achieve success and to achieve your purpose, sometimes you had to make sacrifices, and you had to make people feel that perhaps you were punishing them, but it was for the greater good. The good of, in this case, all Barbadians, in an effort to confine, to maintain, and to reduce as far as possible the spread and obviously the concomitant effects of COVID-19 within the society. Thus far, we have been lucky so far, and I keep my fingers crossed. We have not had any persons requiring to go on ventilators, but we give God thanks, and I think that we need, as all Barbadians, to come together, recognizing the importance of these measures. And with those few words, I beg that this bill be now read a second time.
Senator Franklin.
Thank you very much, sir. I don't think that this is a matter of any controversy, that these measures are necessary. Sir, I know that they're necessary, but not in this context. I don't know why we are here. The government already has the power to do all that we have just described, all the leaders just described. They are contained in several pieces of legislation. First of all, the Emergency Powers Act and the Health Services Regulations. I don't know if the intent is to expose me to more danger by bringing us here, because there's absolutely no reason for this legislation right now. Yes, the measures that the government is outlining could have been placed in an order and signed by the Cabinet Secretary under the Emergency Powers Act when the Governor General declares a state of emergency. And a state of emergency, and if I remember correctly, and I'm going to try to find it here for you, it's under the Governor General can declare a state of emergency if, I don't really found it, where the Governor General is satisfied, A, that a public emergency has arisen as a result of the imminence of a state of war between Barbados and another state, or as a result of an occurrence of any civil unrest or other calamity. I dare say COVID-19 is that other calamity. And so there's absolutely no reason to go and waste time fiddling while Rome burns to bring us here when this occurred done a couple of days ago. I sat down home at my house a few days ago and I heard Grenada read out their proclamation on radio and everything that we are doing now has been done in Grenada. Grenada had 4 people. No, you're not doing it properly. You're doing it based on bad advice. The advice that has been given to you should have been, oh, you got the power, so we're waiting for. Because while we are fiddling, people are mixing and infecting each other as we speak. This, and not be waiting until tomorrow, or whatever else. Look, this thing is dangerous. You know, it was not, from the time we identified the first person in Barbados with coronavirus, we knew that it will not get better in the short, just like that. More people would have been infected. And at that point, that is when our emergency should have clicked in. We have a situation now where we were waiting for a magic number of 25. So when you got it, it's 26, you tell me? Now you have your 26, so you're going to rush it. But why 25? Why not 2? Why not like Grenada 3? You know? Why on God's earth are we dilly-dallying, knowing full well how dangerous this thing is? Because look, you see, the government has not taken this as seriously as it should, and the people, as a result, are not taking it as seriously as it should either. Because the example should have been set up front. Then you read the news or watch it on YouTube as they do.
Mr. President, I know it's Friday evening and the honourable member might have been slightly intoxicated. But for him to stand up in this house and say that the government is not taking it as serious as it could. When I heard the honourable member 10, 12 days ago praising the Honourable Prime Minister for the role she was playing and how the government was addressing this matter. And other members in this Honourable Chamber heard him say so. So to come in here this evening, Mr. President, and say the exact action, it leads you to wonder about the Honourable member.
I have never insulted the Barbados by constipation, but he probably don't suffer from it because he has better access. But I'll tell you something. I did say to the Prime Minister that I appreciate what she was doing and the consultation, whatever, and I complimented her on it. And yes, but what I'm saying, that was 12 days ago. Yeah, because I said that if anything happens to her, you know, right now she's leading the charge. I hadn't seen her for 2 days, and I said I was concerned because she was leading the charge. And if anything happens to her, God forbid, she has a second 11 team behind her that would not be able to continue. So that's why I was concerned, because you other people, that's why I'm serious. It is only the Prime Minister that could manage that lot that you got elected 20th of May 2 years ago now. So I'm saying that if she had anything happens to her, we in Duck's guts. That's what I was talking about. And I'm saying to you, when I complimented her 12 days ago, I said yes to the Prime Minister. Carry on, do what you're doing. But she's taking too long. It has taken too long because in that 12 days, some of those same people who are infected now might have been quarantined or kept away from each other. That's all I'm saying. Look, every other country shutting down. Right now in England, unless you live together, no two people can be seen together, right? Unless you live together. That was done a few days ago in England. Almost a week ago now. All I'm saying is, while we are wasting time drafting fancy legislation and stuff, when legislation already exists, we're settling while we're on burns. This thing is scary, you know. I'm very much in support of the measures that you are purporting to take, or you're going to take, but you didn't have to waste time coming here. You already have the power to do it. That's what I'm talking about, you know. This is a sideshow now. This is I don't know. Whenever this government wants to do something, it has to have dancing and jumping up and all kinds of stuff, or some sort of thing where everything. Get ahead and do the business that we elected you to do. When I say we don't mean people of Barbados, because I vote for me. So I'm saying get ahead and do what you are supposed to do and stop wasting time with unnecessary legislation because you already have it. You already have it. You have it under the Emergency Powers Act. You have it under the Health Services, Communicable and Notifiable Diseases Regulations. So you have all those powers. And the chief medical officer that you are given power to already has those powers. He's the most powerful man in Barbados right now, or any time. You know, a ship coming into Barbados, the chief medical officer said, don't come, it can't come. Don't give it, got on it. You know, and so you're giving him this power now. He has it already. He had it since 1969. So you're not going to give it to him again? That's why I say you're wasting time. I am very sorry that it would seem to God there's some sort of divide. There's no divide on the fighting COVID, trying to make sure people are safe. What I'm saying to you, that you are dithering while people are getting sick. People are mixing, you know. I went to the supermarket the other day, and there's a huddle outside the supermarket. People there stand up and talking and socializing and every kind of stuff, and you have to wait to get in, and then you have to stay a few feet apart. The bank, the same thing. You go to the Republic Bank at Warren, where I did my business yesterday. Everybody's outside. I was outside for 2 hours. People came, stand up in the sun, well, I got a little vitamin D as a result, but they're outside in the huddle. Then you go inside the bank, and they have these circles where you stand up on like you were playing rounders, or baseball if you know what you're doing. It is a waste of time and stupidity. Take serious steps. Keep people away from each other because they will infect each other. So I understand when you said make sure the businesses close. What do you mean close? And if there's absolutely no need for them to be opened, shut them down. Again, sir, you are protecting lives, but you are wasting time bringing legislation that already exists. I dare say, ask anybody, drafters or anybody in the government, tell me what is new about anything in this regulation other than the fines. Nothing. Nothing. And the legislation has not been repealed, it's there. Let me just give you an example of the power that the Governor General, the Cabinet has. Emergency orders. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, when a proclamation of emergency has been made, and so long as the proclamation is enforced, it shall be lawful for the Cabinet to make any orders whatsoever which it considers desirable in the public interest. Now you want a wider scope than that. The Cabinet can do anything it considers necessary in the public interest. So why are we here? When it says you consider the public interest is to make new all legislation, because in the new legislation, that's what I'm saying to you. You already have this power, and if you have this power, use it to good effect. We give the people of Barbados give you the right to do it. Don't come out here now seeking the right again. You already have it. I go on my YouTube, but I was talking about YouTube, then I got interrupted before. And I see people who dying in some countries, 700 a day. We want to happen in Barbados before we take steps to keep people apart. Not 25 what? I don't. For the time you had one, when they didn't have 25, when they read their emergency proclamation a couple of days ago, I think it was Monday. But yes, they got 70,000 people. But when they had one or two, they decided, we ain't doing nothing. So we got better than 25. No, one is enough, because we can see what happened in other countries. We did not have to wait, because all the time we are going on now. People are infecting each other, you know. Okay? Now, this brings me to the question of the 2-week period. My understanding is that the incubation period for this disease, for the coronavirus, is 14 days. So why are you only keeping people apart for 2 weeks? It should be a minimum of 3 weeks. I don't know if you're thinking economics now and saying, but every business is going to make no money, all kind of stuff. But businesses can end up with a lot of dead people who used to work for them. Let's say you shut down today, okay? And I go out and a couple of days later I get infected for whatever reason. I should have at least 14 days. So you should make sure that none of those people who get infected like today or tomorrow are able to, and none is available to pass on this thing. So it should be a minimum of 3 weeks to make sure that you don't have the disease when you go back outside. You know? And so I don't understand why 2 weeks. Don't worry about economics now. And I said before, there's one thing that I have to address that I addressed the last time we were here, and I want to speak to it again, because this morning and the whole day, my phone was ringing about employers trying to take advantage of their workers in light of this COVID-19 coronavirus situation. The government is ordering the country closed. And employers are telling the workers, okay, that is your vacation. If you have 3 weeks vacation, the government closed for 2 weeks, well, you only got a week left. That is unfair, it is unreasonable, and it is illegal. They are cashing, they're trying to cash in on this COVID thing. I mean, they say they haven't got no conscience. We have people in Barbados who know they're only thinking about their bottom line. They're not thinking, look, you know, so maybe we could kill off half the people in Barbados, you know. They're only interested in, I am not going to make any money, so I'm going to make sure my staff suffer as a result. Under the law right now, if you're going to send somebody on vacation, you have to give them 2 weeks notice, or it is not a vacation. The problem comes here now where some people are taking advice from their trade union, because the Employers Confederation is a trade union, telling them that they can negotiate with the workers. You cannot negotiate outside the law. If the law says to you, this is what the law requires, then you have to follow it, unless the law says you can. And I've read the thing over and over again. I've not seen where you can go and agree to waive that 2 weeks notice. You have to have at least 2 weeks notice. Because let me tell you something. It would have been far better to lay off the workers where they will get unemployment benefits. And then they'll still be entitled to their holidays with pay, but the employers don't want to pay that. They do not want to pay. So as a result, they are taking advantage of workers of this country. The government needs to do something about that. They want to put regulations in place under the Miscellaneous Controls Act. Well, do something about what happens to the workers as well. Again, too, you don't need this legislation to do that because the legislation already exists. The Miscellaneous Controls Act. I worked at price control, and that's what we used to do. Sir, I do not intend to go on much longer. Just to say to the government, get on with the job. I'm going to repeat it. I appreciated very much the Prime Minister consulting. She even consulted with me. So I don't have a difficulty with her consulting. But once you have consulted and you don't have to make a decision, you make the decision and move on. Because that consultation you're talking about took place 12 days ago, just 11 days ago. So this is 11 or 12 days that measures can be put in place. We need those measures last week. We don't need them Saturday. So get on with the job. We elected you to do it. Man, I said we, I mean the people of Barbados. Right? He want me back here by you know. Anyhow, sir. This a thing that also bothers me is this voluntary, what do you call it, where they actually stay at home and you're going to do it by yourself. People have been turning up at the Labor Department saying, oh, I only got a week left. Yes. People are not taking this thing seriously. You know what I mean? They turn up at the Labor Department saying, I only got a week left because they're going to check on their claim or whatever they had, they got problems, they're going to the Labor Department because they only got a week left. You understand what I'm saying to you? People are not taking this thing seriously. So the measures are necessary, and they have been necessary because that lady could have been infected and she would have gone to the Labor Department and wipe out what's the Labor officers up there. You need these measures. You need them urgently, and stop with this dilly-dallying. With that minor thing, I hope, sir, that the government listens and stop dilly-dallying. Thank you very much.
Senator Rogers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy President. I rise just to say a few brief words on this matter, inasmuch as one of the directives coming out of this initiative is the closing of places of worship. And I know that persons would expect me to address this in this honorable place. I'll begin using a very unlikely source, or what persons may consider an unlikely source for me. Well, it's the work of the Indian philosopher of the 19th, early 20th century, Ramakrishna, who once said, "I have practiced all religions, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, and I have practiced various Hindu sects, and I have found that it is the same God toward whom all of us direct our thoughts, and we just follow him by different paths." I point that out, sir, to make the point that COVID-19 calls us to recognize the common bond we share as humanity, and that it is not affecting persons of a particular religion and not another. And perhaps it should guide us to recognize the sovereignty of God in our lives. I, like most religious leaders, and perhaps particularly Christian ones, love the very first verse of Psalm 122. I was glad when they said to me, "Let us go to the house of the Lord." I love to quote Psalm 84. "How dear to me are thy dwellings, O Lord of hosts." But I also recognize that serious times call for serious measures. And religion ought to be, and I believe was intended to be, a stabilizing and balancing force within society. And so when the society is in crisis, when the society is going through any point of distress, it is expected that religions will rise to the fore and help to quell the fears of persons. It is against that backdrop that I will speak briefly this evening, sir. Having faith does not mean tempting faith. Having faith does not mean putting God to the test. In fact, in this season of Lent, that is one of the very passages that come to mind. For yes, Psalm 91 says, "He will give his angels charge over you. They'll bear you up in their hands, lest you dash your foot against a stone." But we also recall how we began this season of Lent, reflecting on St. Luke's Gospel, chapter 4, the temptation of our Lord in the wilderness. And in the 9th verse of that chapter, Satan, the accuser, quotes that very verse. "Jump off the temple. Remember, he said he'll give his angels charge over you. Why don't you do it? Show yourself. Show how great this God is." And it was our Lord who said, "It is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." I wish to call, though I am not, perhaps, authorized to speak for any other religion or perhaps even any other denomination within Christianity. But from this place, I wish to call on all religious leaders and all religions to exercise reason at this time. That if we love the God we serve so much, and we love his people so much, anything that would put one of our people in danger, we ought to resist from. In fact, it was St. Paul in his Corinthian correspondence, I believe Senator Holder will help me with the chapter and verse, when confronted with the question of food offered to idols, St. Paul said, there's nothing wrong with it. But if doing that would cause one of your brothers or sisters to falter, it is better to desist from it. And so, sir, I wish to encourage persons of all religions in our nation to recognize that separation from our place of worship does not mean separation from God. If you read the Old Testament, there are certain passages you will read that will give the impression that you have to be at the temple all the time. But that is because at a point in time in Israel's history, they believed in a localized presence of God in the temple at Jerusalem. And it's quite interesting for those of us who follow liturgical cycles, those denominations. We do not just get up any Sunday and read whatever passage the priest decides he wants to read that day. The liturgical cycle sets out certain readings. And it's quite a coincidence that for Sunday coming, our reading from the Old Testament comes from Ezekiel chapter 37. The account of the valley of dry bones. And that has as its context a time when the people of Israel were separated from the temple that they loved. They were in exile in Babylon. It is out of that experience that the Psalm 137 emerged. By the rivers of Babylon we sat, and we wept when we remembered you, O Zion. And the people of this land told us, sing some songs that you sing in Jerusalem. But they responded, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? For them, the temple was where Yahweh lived and Yahweh dwelt. And they felt that if we are separated from that, we cannot possibly worship him. But the prophet Ezekiel had to offer hope and tell them, look, I was sitting at the river Shabar, and I saw the kabod, the glory of God, descend upon us here at Babylon. So we do not need the physical presence of the temple in Jerusalem for God to be with us. And indeed, in the passage in chapter 37, the people had felt that God had abandoned them, and they could not survive. Son of man, go and speak to the people of Israel. For they're saying that they're like dry bones. And the message was, these dry bones will live. And they did live. They returned from exile in the year 538-39 BC. And they rebuilt their temple around the year 520 BC. And they served their God. And that temple existed as a place of worship. And they went there until it was eventually destroyed around the year 70 AD. I have said all of that to say, sir, for Christians out there who may feel as though the carpet has been pulled from under them, that our God is omnipresent. And as you sit in your homes, as you huddle with your families, that God is there. And that God will listen and hear your prayers and respond to your needs. I wish to perhaps pull some good out of all that is happening here. I did say a few days ago on the social level that it was a time to press the reset button. Perhaps at the deeper spiritual level, it is a time to do exactly what Lent calls us to do. To carry out the type of introspection necessary, even as religious institutions. For sometimes it is very easy to go through the motions from one day to another. Like the hamster in his little cage just turning, and because you're moving quickly, you believe that you're doing something. But perhaps it's a time for us all as individuals and as institutions, as families, to sit in our homes, reassess, reinvigorate ourselves, so that when this time passes, we may find ourselves to be better versions of the persons we were, better versions of the institutions that we are now, a better nation that can forge a future, not just focusing and counting material things as signs of success, but getting back to the deeper spiritual value of the other, the deeper spiritual value of humanity. I believe that this is a time that will bring at least a modicum of calm to mothers who every night are worried where their sons are. And perhaps this is a time now when those young men can sit at home and contemplate life. Perhaps it's a time for mothers and fathers who would have been worried about their young daughter, who, as Charlie Pride said, was searching for love in all the wrong places. Perhaps this time at home will help her to assess her life and her value. And even as I listened to Senator Franklin there, perhaps it's a time for employers to recognize that they're human beings working for them and not just statistics. I believe, sir, that in spite of all that is happening and the seriousness of what is about to confront us, this can be a moment of great transformation for us as a people. And I encourage us all to heed the advice of our leaders, heed the advice of our health officials. Stay at home. With those few words, I thank you, sir.
Senator Moore.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, everyone. I rise to just make a few very short comments. The government of Barbados would certainly have taken the actions it's taken at this time because of the necessity to protect Barbadians. Sometimes, even when I listen to some of the offerings here within the Senate, it is clear to me that sometimes people don't always understand the rationalization behind what we do. So, just to reiterate, first and foremost, that our main intent is always for the best interests of Barbadians. Now, I heard one of my fellow colleague senators refer to the rationalization for us to be here and why the need to make these amendments within this bill. And as he rightfully did read out something on the emergency powers, but as he also would have indicated, that's used in times of states of unrest and other type activities of that nature, states of
Point of order, sir.
states of war.
I hate to interrupt Senator Moore, but she's misleading the House, and
It's not here.
I never said that. Or the Act never said that. The Act says or other calamity. It is not only state of war, it's or other calamity. So please do not misquote me or misquote the legislation. You're misleading the House.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President, for that slight interruption. State of war, unrest, and I think he said another calamity. And that's exactly what I have written here, and what I'm saying. But the reality is, Mr. Deputy President, as I've always said every time I rise to speak, we should never follow the examples and look at other jurisdictions and what other people do to determine what we do as Barbadians. Barbados is a sovereign state and a sovereign nation, has been so since 1966. And since 1966, successive governments have continued to make the right decisions on the behalf of Barbadians. And that is why Barbados has been known to be a country and a nation where people have said that we punch above our weight. When we look at Barbados and we look at the size of this country, 166 square miles, a population of just a little under 300,000, and we look at what has been done by successive governments since 1966, it is clear that many of our decisions are certainly the right ones, and that includes the way in which we govern our country. Barbados is a country of laws and regulations. Barbados is a country where we ensure that what we do is properly done and not done in an ad hoc manner that may be queried, a manner that may not allow you to properly institute actions that you may want to do. One that always ensures that we always follow what laws need to be followed, and in instances where there needs to be an adjustment to legislation in order to enact such laws, we do so. Barbados is well known for always ensuring that we do the correct thing when it comes to things of that nature. And this is also such an occasion, Mr. Deputy President. So, as I said before, it is unfortunate that some people are not cognizant or able to recognize that simple fact. But nevertheless, let me go on to what I really rose to speak about. And not just to speak about doing the right thing and in the right way. And so it's always a wonderful thing when we have people like the Honourable Prime Minister, Mia Amor Motley, and the Barbados Labour Party, where we always ensure that we try to do it in the correct way, regardless of what other people may think and what they may suggest as to how we are to proceed. We will continue to proceed and do what we know is best for Barbadians. Nevertheless, Mr. Deputy President, let me get quickly to my point. I don't want to spend any long time in my presentation because certainly we all understand the need for some level of alacrity this evening. What I want to say is that within this particular situation, I really want to thank all of the media, broadcast media, print media, new media, including some PR companies and ad agencies who have all assisted us in ensuring that Barbadians understand what is going on and they're well informed. They have helped us to disseminate our message to all Barbadians, not just a select few Barbadians, where everyone, we are hoping, is going to understand and continue to understand what is happening and not be reliant on misinformation, fake information, information coming from outside of our borders that may not necessarily may not apply to all particular conditions and state within this jurisdiction, within our island, our country, Barbados. I also want to thank all radio stations. The radio stations, all of them who are carrying the messages as public service announcements. Many people will not know that when radio stations carry these messages, they're not compensated. So all that particular time that they're using in order to carry the PSAs is done and to ensure that people are informed and I really want to thank all of them. I want to also thank the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, TV8. CBC TV is the only free source of visual information for Barbadians. I'll say it again. It is the only source of free visual information for Barbadians, CBC TV8. Yes, we have radio, which is certainly free, but TV8 allows people not just hear, but to see, and oftentimes when you're able to see something, it enables you to understand what the message that's being delivered much better. And certainly TV8 has done so and will continue to do so. Yes, we have things circulating on other forms of media. I heard someone earlier in a different time, in a different place, speak about MCTV. I know we have, Mr. President, if you may indulge me to call their names, there's Flow and Digicel, but these are all services that people have to pay for. Everyone does not have those services. Everyone does not have a cell phone that has the ability to be able to watch anything because they may not have the necessary amount of credit on their phone. They may not have access to free Wi-Fi. So TV8, once again, has always and will continue to provide information to Barbadians free of charge, where they're able to visually see and hear what is happening to them. This is not the first time that TV8 has done so, Mr. Deputy President. I think in every single instance where we've had any kind of disaster approaching or a disaster occur, TV8 has been there right through day and night providing this information, and I really would like to thank those hard-working people up at the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. I would also like to thank the cell providers that I mentioned earlier, Mr. Deputy President, for sending out many of our messages, having been condensed into a form known as SMS. So when we send out these messages, they then send them out to their clients, so they are aware of what is happening, because some certain SMS is the ability to be able to receive the message, whether or not you have credit or not. So that's very good for us, and I would like to thank them. I would like to give a special thank you to the people from the Barbados Government Information Services, known as I think the acronym is GIS, is how people know them, Government Information Service. They have worked tirelessly day and night to put out all of these messages. I think sometimes, Mr. Deputy President, they look to see if I'm awake when they send me something to see if I'm looking or watching. Sometimes I get it 2 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 4 o'clock, sometimes 11 at night. It varies. Whenever they're finished, they send it out right away so that they can, so someone can comment and as to what has been done by them. I don't think that people can say they have not seen these messages. They have been done on all types of platforms. You only have to drive the roads of Barbados, and on certain roads, there are huge billboards, and in simple language, simple graphics. We have used things like all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the social media platforms that are available to us. We've been using those to get the message. The daily newspapers, radio stations, and of course, TV, in order for people to know what is happening so that they're well informed and that there's no misunderstanding as to what is the correct messages that relates to our country. I am sure people are watching and getting stuff from all over the world, but that does not define what is applicable to us within our environment. So I want to thank all these people who have been doing this and will continue to do this regardless of what occurs on our island as far as this particular virus and pandemic goes. Now, having said all that, I once again want to appeal and take this opportunity to appeal to the entire Barbadian public. Please, do not take fake information and use that in order to formulate the decisions that you want to make to protect yourselves and your family. Please use the information that is there and provided for by the media here in Barbados, especially the Barbados Government Information Service. Please go to their website if you have that ability. If you're driving around and you see something that has on the coat of arms or it has on the Government Information Service logo, you will know that information to be factual and true. And that is the information you should be acting on when you make the decisions for yourselves and for your family. I am sure things are happening in Spain and in Italy and in Germany and all over the world. But that is not Barbados. Our island is a specific area with specific needs, requirements, and capabilities. And why am I saying that, Mr. Deputy President? Something as simple as, in some jurisdictions, people may not have certain underlying conditions. I don't know. I do not know what the health of people living in Italy is like. I don't know what afflicts them. But I know what afflicts Barbadians. We all do. We all do. We all hear all of the risk category type individuals, and we know how many of those roughly we have in Barbados. And it's for that reason that we make the particular decisions that we make. We make the decisions based on what obtains here on this island. Now, Barbados has people in all the risk categories. They have elderly people. They have people that suffer from diabetes. It's well known that many Barbadians are afflicted with that. They have people that have heart condition and hypertension. And I put the two of them together only because many people with heart conditions have hypertension and vice versa. So, but we have those as a risk category. We have people who are cancer survivors, so their immune systems will be compromised. So we know the risk categories here within, and of course, let me not forget the many people with respiratory conditions. I'm sure Senator Maynard here, who I think is a person who has been a doctor for a very long time, much longer. I mean, Senator Maynard is much older than I am. And I know, Mr. Deputy President, I'm not young. But I think when Senator Maynard would have qualified, Mr. Deputy President, I was still at secondary school, or maybe primary school, I'm not even sure, but I was still at school. So Senator Maynard, who has a wealth of experience, will be able to attest to some of these things, and I'm sure if he speaks today, he may want to speak briefly on it. But we know the risk categories, so we know why we make the decisions that we make in this island, because we know what we are facing and what Barbadians are facing and what needs to be supplied to Barbadians to ensure that they're protected, to ensure that Barbadians are protected, because this is a jurisdiction that, unlike what one of my fellow senators got up in here today and said and doesn't seem to understand, is that this is a sovereign country, independent since 1966. And we will do the work that any Barbadian legislative assembly would do. And what is that? To follow the laws of this country and to ensure that they are put in place correctly. And there's no guessing. There's no opportunity for people to misunderstand what is being done here today. So, and in closing now, Mr. Deputy President, I just want to say to all Barbadians, please heed the advice of all of the applicable government entities that will continue to give Barbadians information as to what they are to do. The government entities who are entrusted and empowered to do such that, Mr. Deputy President. I also want all Barbadians to follow the directives of the services that are there for their protection, like fire, police, and all the others. Because if we are able to understand that we need, if any time in our lives, to ensure that we follow what we are told to do in order to protect ourselves and our families, we will have a much better chance of being able to battle what I call an invisible enemy. Why am I calling it an invisible enemy? Because a virus is invisible to us with the naked eye. We can't see it. We're not in a laboratory. We don't have a microscope or anything to see it. So it's an invisible enemy. And there are ways of tackling this particular situation. And that is why we are here today, for clarity. That is why certain entities will be allowed to remain open in order to assist people. I want everyone who can listen, hear, see what me at this point in time, remember to follow the directions and the advice of those who we have entrusted to give that to Barbadians to protect themselves and their families. And with that, Mr. Deputy President, I'm obliged to you.
Senator Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President.
Old boy.
If I would first like to clarify my age. Mr. Deputy President, I entered secondary school at age 10. So I might have been wrong for a long time, but I'm quite young. Mr. Deputy President, I wish to repeat that there is no wrong time to do the right thing. And I believe that the government is doing the right thing. We are a country of law and order, and it's important that we should remain that way. And I listened carefully to my colleague, Senator Walcott, read out for all to hear what will be done, what should be done. It is just a matter of enforcing it. Mr. President, while we would wish for all who reside in Barbados to obey the instructions, all will not. And what we must recognize is that what is being referred to as the invisible enemy is indeed invisible. And for every one person, the statistics suggest that for every one person who is infected, that person infects 2.6 people. So when we see our fellow citizens in long lines outside of the banks and the food stores, huddled together, I shudder. And I shudder because I do not know, and we do not know, and they do not know, and no one knows how many people in that line are infected. And I really wonder if the length of time assigned during the day where people can move about should not have been shorter. If you give an inch, people will take a mile. And I do not know if 12 hours is not too long. We have 30 polling districts, and we may well have to, or the government may well have to come back and restrict movement to certain polling districts by day. Because if our curve takes off, it will be catastrophic. And we need to be each other's keepers. I want to make a comment about medications. Already, persons have been hoarding. And they've been hoarding, and I understand persons' fears about vital medications for themselves, but for every person who fills a 6-month prescription and holds it, it means there may be 6 people who may not get medication. And you may be hoarding medication that might be expired by the time you take it. And remember that not everyone has your interests at heart, because a sale is a sale. So you may buy 6 months of medication that expires in 3 months. And in 3 months' time, you might be taking the expired medication. But the person who desperately needs some cannot get any because you have taken all. We must be each other's keepers. Senator Rogers referred to the enlightened. And it is true that we are all the same. And this disease does not respect status or color or race or religion or anything we can imagine. And we have, all of us, to look out for each other. Mr. President, Deputy President, I am obliged to you.
Senator Driggs.
Mr. Deputy President, and I will be brief given the circumstances, but I just thought I would rise to make a contribution because I have a few concerns. And they're not concerns that would necessarily lie in legislation or through some political divide, but because we are talking today about human life. And sir, I start there because Barbados has 26 confirmed cases. And rightly so, Senator Maynard just expressed to us that in every one, the statistic is on average they infect 2.6 other persons. So sir, I just sat and I did some calculations. And noting that we had those 26 cases in 10 days, I'm not factoring in the rate, or the time, I should say, by which persons, the rate of infection by time. So if you have 26 cases, then, Mr. Deputy President, you can assume that they have then infected another total of, which would bring our total to 68 persons. And then if those 68 persons then infect, keeping with that rate of infection, 175 persons. Those 175 then go to 456 persons. Mr. Deputy President, what I just described to you is an exponential increase in numbers, and this is where my concern lies. Senator Maynard also noted that given where we are now with these 26 cases, we may be giving persons too much leeway as it relates to the time that they're allowed to operate. Sir, I have a concern that for the next 2 weeks, there is some leniency that we're giving to persons. And it is not in a case where you're not looking out for their best interest, but sometimes you actually have to protect people from themselves. The advice that I was given from those who are in hot spots on how to deal with COVID-19 and its spread on a personal level was very simple. Act like you have the virus. And if I take that, very simple, act like you have. If I take that advice and I apply it to the measures that government is seeking to implement under this state of emergency, I believe there is too much leniency. Because if I am acting as though I have the virus, I would not be given 12 hours to walk around in society. The other concern that I genuinely have is Barbados' profile as it relates to this virus. Barbados is the fourth most densely populated country in the Americas. We have a population that is aging, a number of persons who are, and I would call them now over the age of 55, I would include those persons. We have a number of diabetics. We have a number of persons with respiratory problems, particularly asthma. We have a number of persons who are hypertensive. We've heard these things over and over and over. And sir, when you take those two things that I've just described to you, our country profile along with the number of cases that we've had in the time frame, the measures seem lenient, Mr. Deputy President. That is all I'm trying to express right now. I also want to state that I disagree somewhat with Senator Moe's remarks as it relates to not looking necessarily at other countries. I think lessons learned from places who have not been handling COVID-19 in a manner that allows for the containment of spread should be where we start. Paraphrasing what she said, or my interpretation of what she said.
Mr. Deputy President, I have to raise on a point of order. Today up by Mr. Deputy President. My point of order, Mr. Deputy President, is that I did not say that. What I said, Mr. Deputy President, for her elucidation, is that my point of order is I said she's misleading the chamber, Mr. Deputy President. I did not say what she said. So, and she can go back and check Hansard, and she will see that she was clearly not perhaps listening to me quite as she should. You know, sometimes today, Mr. Deputy President, was rubbish day up by where I live. They pick up garbage on Friday, Mr. Deputy President. I know it's garbage day in here too. Sorry, Mr. Deputy President. What I really got up to say was that I said, and I'd be very clear, that we should not look at other countries in order to make decisions that we have to make every day as Barbadians. Because Barbados is a unique place. What they may be doing, Mr. Deputy President, as I explained, in other places may not be what you want to do here in Barbados. With different environment. So, Mr. Deputy President, please, she is misleading the chamber, and I would like her to stop.
Mr. Deputy President, I take what the Senator has made in terms of her clarification. But nonetheless, for me, I believe that making decisions here in Barbados, there are examples, and this has nothing to do with what the Senator has made. This is the point that I am making now. If you're looking to put a plan in place as it relates to the spread of COVID-19, I believe in putting that package together, you look at cases where countries have not contained the virus in a manner that is sufficient enough to stop the loss of life. And sir, with that, I just would like to also say that it appears that government is seeking to put people first. I was particularly happy with the measures as it relates to the social protection measures that the Prime Minister spoke to last Friday, I believe it was. Because although going through the IMF program, when I understood the gravity of the situation as it relates to the economic fallout, my first reaction was you have to put social protection measures in place. Because, sir, without people, you do not have a country. Without people, sir, you do not have a nation. And I also want to speak to some of the comments made by Senator Rogers and ask all of us in this time of crisis to also reflect on the type of country that we want after this ordeal is over. And I really would like that when we do return to some state of normalcy, whatever that may look like, I hope it is not the business as usual scenario. Sir, I do believe this is an opportunity to hit reset. And that we move forward where we transform our society in a very meaningful way. Because clearly the things that we have for so long dragged on and made excuses for we've realized in an instant when our back is up against the wall, these changes can be made. One very clear example of that is persons working from home. But sir, more succinctly, I would want that when we do return to some state of normalcy, that the government looks very strategically at looking at just more than economic growth, that it looks at well-being. Well-being, the well-being of your citizens. Not just employment numbers, and this is not to say that the government does not do this at this point in time, but the quality of employment within Barbados. And so that we live within environmental boundaries that we've been set within. So I think we have the opportunity to build something better coming out of this crisis, where we can all have a vested stake in not just the economy, but our society. And as a young person, I really do hope that those in decision-making positions take this crisis as an opportunity to hit reset for this country. So I want to stand and also say thank you to those persons who will be on the front lines and who have been on the front lines. The doctors, the nurses, the Port Authority, those at the airport, who are selflessly at this time risking their own lives to either keep Barbados supplied with certain necessities, caring for persons, whatever that may be. And so I also want to publicly extend prayers to this entire nation, and particularly the Prime Minister at this time, because it was acutely made aware to me in that moment when she revealed that she was going to have a procedure over the weekend. I realized how much her destiny is tied to all of us. And I realized how much her life matters to all of us. And despite it all, I wish the government well in this ordeal. I wish us all well. May God have mercy on us all.
I'm looking for Senator Cummings.
Mr. Deputy President, this is a moment where all of us rise to speak briefly, but also to take the opportunity to address the nation and to share with each other in this moment. Mr. President, I want to start by saying that there are some times when we politic. There are some times when partisanship is appropriate. There are some times, Mr. Deputy President, when grandstanding is entertaining. And then there are some moments, Mr. Deputy President, when a virus wreaks havoc across the world and threatens our densely populated nation, and we recognize what is asked of all of us. There's a level of maturity, measure, responsibility, astuteness, professionalism, and above all else, Mr. President, patriotism and humanness that is required in this moment. I don't think that we all have the answers. None of us do. But I think one of the things that is always expected of us in this chamber and in the other place, Mr. President, is constructive discourse. When we talk about things, Mr. President, like crime and violence, at the root of all of that, we talk about things like conflict resolution. We talked about the ability to talk to each other without and disagreeing without being disagreeable. And I'm calling on the members of this place to represent that themselves. I was particularly disappointed with the very first submission today, Mr. President, because that did not reflect who we need to be in this moment. It did not reflect that measure, that humanness, that professionalism, that astuteness, that nationalism, and most importantly, that patriotism. It did not reflect what the moment calls for, Mr. Deputy President. And we are used to it. That comes all the time, but Mr. President, in this moment, where even our colleagues are dealing with the emotion of what their own employees and what their families are dealing with, it's unfortunate that even in this moment we could not rise to the occasion. But nonetheless, there are those who do. And I want to start by recognizing the extraordinary team of people who work in the Bridgetown port. They have risen to the occasion, Mr. Deputy President. Every day, every night, 7 days a week, they have risen to the occasion, and I want to recognize them in this moment. These are not people, Mr. Deputy President, who are at the top of the corporate ladder. These are not people who are remunerated at levels that can compensate in the event that the worst happens. These are people who are ordinary Barbadians like me and you, Mr. Deputy President, who are living every single day to look after their families and to make lives for themselves and for the ones that they love. But they're standing up every day. They're leaving their families at home, and they're coming into the Bridgetown port, and they're servicing cargo vessels. They're making sure that the people of this country, as they panic buy and as they're concerned about where their medical supplies and their food supplies will come from, they're making sure that those shelves remain stacked with the supplies to serve this nation. Mr. Deputy President, they have worked through the night, ensuring that people got home off of cruise ships, ensuring that crew and passengers alike were able to fly out. And they still are working with the ships who, although passenger-less, still have a minimum number of crew members on board, and they're ensuring that things like fuel, fresh water, and stores, they're able to get on board. I want to recognize those who have risen to the occasion. And I have to stand in this moment to recognize those people who I have responsibility for. I want also to say that this morning, in an extraordinary board meeting of the Barbados Port, we made a determination. We are a commercial state-owned enterprise. If we don't have ships sailing, whether cargo or cruise, our revenues are severely impacted. And we are seeing in the scenarios which we have modeled that over the next few months, and depending on how the projections last into the beginning of the next cruise season, which is estimated to begin, if we go the long run scenario, in November 2021, November 2020, we could lose probably close to $16 million in revenue. But that notwithstanding, Mr. Deputy President, because people show up every day, and because people matter, and because we have a minister who always says people over politics, and that's where I started today, we have ensured that we protect our labor force. And we have ensured that we have introduced what we call now a level 3 protocol, which allows us to treat the cargo and ships and the movement of cargo throughout the port in a very specific way that meets the international shipping standards that have been evolved in order to meet the requirements for this. So that when our workers, who are constituted as part of the essential services, they come to work on any given day while the rest of us are hopefully doing what we must and staying at home, we are ensuring that they take nothing back with them. We are ensuring that we separate our own crew in the port from crews on board ships who are coming from one port to another. We are making sure that we are sanitizing areas so that persons who are working in those areas are protected, but also we are ensuring that from the time they disembark a vessel on the gangway, that they are disinfected and sanitization procedures are put in place. We are protecting those who are working in service to this nation because they have risen to the occasion, Mr. Deputy President. And they will continue as an essential service to do just that. There are those too, Mr. President, who work with us, and we call them casuals and reserves. they are going to be among those who are impacted, because at the height of the season, whether it is cruise or cargo, those are the persons who come into the port and supplement our labor force. And the port made a determination this morning, Mr. Deputy President, that notwithstanding whatever financial challenges we expect to go through in the coming months, that we will be among those employers that will provide additional support for those who are displaced and those who are the most vulnerable. And we made a commitment that if we make $100,000 in the next few months and we lose $500,000, that we will use $100,000 of port monies to support the most vulnerable in our societies, Mr. Deputy President, in supporting the Prime Minister's Adopt a Family program. The port this morning committed those funds, $100,000, to support the Adopt a Family program. That is our commitment, Mr. Deputy President, because even though we are facing our own challenges, even though we are seeing revenues declining or vanishing altogether, we know what is required of us in this moment. And I want to thank Senator Rogers for his very thoughtful contribution, because it kept me riveted to my seat. This is what we're talking about, rising to the occasion. We're talking about what is required of us now. And in closing, I want to address a number of things in our country. For those who are rising to the occasion, Mr. Deputy President, there are those who we still need to. We need people to follow the instructions and stay home. I've heard the comments made by Senator Drakes in terms of those who perhaps feel as though the time frame is a bit too lax. Mr. Deputy President, I believe the Attorney General earlier today made it very clear what the requirements need to be, but we're also asking people to do the right thing. Stay at home. If you do not work in these essential services, stay at home. Whatever your aberration is, forget it. This is not that moment. Rise to the occasion and stay at home. I also want to say to people that there are a number of ways in which we have heard for the longest time that can prevent the spread of the disease. We need people to rise to the occasion there too, Mr. Deputy President. I went out, I'm out from time, obviously, all the time. I can't quite stay in because I have a port to deal with and we have things to do. But, Mr. Deputy President, I'm struck that everywhere I go, I'm still having to ask people to step a few feet away from me. People are still not maintaining social distancing. I am troubled, Mr. Deputy President, that everywhere I go, I see crowds which are huddled together and they're still not social distancing. Mr. Deputy President, we asked for the country months ago, and there was a lengthy debate on every possible channel, in every single news media, social media, the call-in programs. Why isn't the government shutting down the country? Country has been shut down and everyone is clamoring for an exemption, Mr. President. We need people to rise to the occasion. We need people to do the right thing. In this moment, we are asking you to stay home for your own protection. Everybody wants an exception. And my phone has gone crazy all day for people trying to explain, to justify why they should not be a part of the shutdown. The shutdown that so many clamored for weeks. Mr. Deputy President, this is that moment we require people to step up. We need people to protect themselves because that's the only way we can protect others. Stay at home. Find another way to do what you want to do, electronically or by some other means, but you need to stay at home. Let those who need to be on the road, because the agencies that are functioning in those spaces have put measures in place for their protection and in turn yours. Stay at home. Rise to the occasion. Barbados needs you. Everyone needs you to do the right thing. And with those few words, Mr. Deputy President, I give my full support to this bill and urge Barbadians, please look out for each other. Look out for yourselves. Look out for your families. But most importantly, stay at home.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I rise to wrap up this debate. I do so with a sense of disappointment this Friday evening. At a time when I thought that all of us saw as Barbadians in this honourable chamber, that there was a time, if there was ever a time to come together in support of a government which, like all the other governments throughout the world, is battling the scourge of the pandemic of COVID-19, which has chosen a modality of operation in terms of a national preparedness plan, a plan that was thought out as far back as January this year, when the government recognized what was happening globally. And the Ministry of Health put together its EOC to start working to deal with this. At that time, it wasn't a pandemic. It had been described as a disease of severe importance by the WHO. Back then, this government, the Ministry of Health, was getting together and meeting and putting a national preparedness plan in place to prepare and to deal with the eventuality of COVID-19, recognizing, unlike some members in this Honourable Chamber, that Barbados is not some sort of impervious balloon that once you cover it and secure it, we will somehow survive a pandemic. Perhaps very fertile thinking, but I don't know how rational. I heard, Mr. President, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition in this chamber at a consultation, speaking clearly and pellucidly to the reasons why he supported the government's approach to the management of COVID and why we were not, why he did not support the closing of the borders. Today, I hear from the same opposition, not necessarily the same person, that the government was too lax in its approach to this matter. There is not a country in this world, Mr. President, there is not one that can tell you with 100% certainty that whatever they did in terms of managing COVID was indeed correct. Not one. But we have some wonderful persons who have some delightful imaginations, who can never support anything, who always have to criticize. I'm not saying they're here, but can tell you that the government was too lax in their approach and that the government should have taken it more seriously earlier on. And that they should have done this. And some of these same individuals, be they in here or outside of here, would have accused the government of not knowing what it was doing if it had done that. And how would these same poor people survive if a government was vile enough to close the borders and cut off trade to Barbados? And they talk about the people that they care about, the poor and the downtrodden. And they would have prospered and done better in a situation like that. They would have had jobs if it closed Barbados to tourism and all that. The poor and downtrodden would have prospered just to be critical of a government. And some of them even have the temerity to pretend that they have some sympathy in terms of the leadership of the government. And then to go further and state that a government, perhaps after we get over COVID, perhaps to become more caring and look after the people. Where have these people been? Where have they been? Which planet have they been living on? Which gas have they been inhaling to coming here with such mindless thinking this Friday evening? Well, Mr. President, God is good. And I look across at Senator Holder and I say he is good and he's in the midst of all things. And he sees and understands things that we can't see, he sees. He sees through all of us. He sees the sincerity. He sees the honesty. He sees the commitment. He sees the will to do good. And in this setting, the members of the government, and indeed the people of Barbados, And I dare say the majority of the honourable members of this chamber are with the government on this one. And with those few words, Mr. President, I beg that this bill be now read a second time.
The question is that the bill under consideration. To come in. Go ahead. The question is that the bill under consideration, the Emergency Management Amendment Bill 2020, be read a second time. Honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg that you do not give the chair and the Senate resolve itself Sorry. Mr. President, I beg that Your Honour do not leave this chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The senators in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, you say no. Thinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 3 stand part.
The question is that Clause 3 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye.
Sir, before we
Those against,
vote,
please.
Before we vote, do I stand for this? I can't recall. Just that I believe, sir, that it is worth. I believe, sir, that while we should vote on it and support it now, I believe that the Senate is imperative that we at least make a note. The clause as drafted requires that the Governor General shall order the houses to reconvene within 5 days, and I believe that that may not be something which was contemplated in terms of the intention. So if it does direct that the Governor General, that Her Excellency does call us back within the 5-day period, we would need to have some clarification. But I think it is something that we need to record and still move forward on it.
That is the provision of the act that they're copying.
Mr. Chairman, the comment is noted, and I've discussed with the honourable member, and in the circumstances, I beg that the clause 3 stand part.
No issue with just once we have the annotation, we should proceed, yes. I'm in support of the vote.
The question is that Clause 3 stand part.
Aye.
Honourable senators in favour?
Aye.
Against? Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
I beg to move that Clause 4 stand part.
The question is that Clause 4 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 5.
I beg to move that clause 5 stand part. I don't have to.
It comes to you as a
The question is that clause 5 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I now do not report to His Honour the Deputy President the passing of one bill in committee. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Be now read a third time.
The question is that the bill under consideration be read a third time. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Emergency Management Amendment Act 2020.
The question is that the bill be passed and be cited as the Emergency Management Amendment Bill 2020. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The bill has been passed and will be so cited. Queen Elizabeth Hospital.
Mr. Deputy President, order number 4 in the name of the Leader of Government Business to move the second reading of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Amendment Bill 2020.
Mr. President, this is a very straightforward and simple bill, and a simple amendment of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Amendment Act, seeking essentially, we all know that the government has been preparing facilities at various facilities in preparation as part of the National Preparedness Plan for COVID-19. We have facilities in the north of the island, in Harrison's Point. We've been utilizing Paragon in terms of for quarantine and also for isolation of individuals. And there apparently have been discussions with private sector providers for various medical facilities in Belleville. And as we prepare, recognizing that you might have cases of COVID which need to have urgent surgery. For example, a person with COVID could have an acute appendicitis and need surgery. You could also have persons in labor who have COVID, who have complications. And it is the government's fight to ensure that the QEH is protected. And in this, it speaks to the government plans to enter into, and apart from Harrison's Point and Paragon, etc., it plans to enter into arrangements with some of these entities, this private sector entity. And the amendment would allow the hospital, as in the amendment in effect in terms of designation on the clause 2 here, the minister may by order designate as part of the hospital any lands or buildings that he may think fit to be used as such, and any lands or buildings so designated shall be subject to this act, to allow the hospital in this crisis situation to have jurisdiction over Harrison's Point, over Paragon, where the main medical and nursing care and direction will come from. With those few words, I beg to move that this bill be now read as second.
Senator Franklin.
Mr. President, again, there's no divide on the issues. What we are trying to do is just, like I said the last time, was just the form. All right? But this one here, so I just want to make some comments because very few comments, not a lot. And it's not more concerned about the health professionals that work in these areas, that will be required to work in these areas. All right? They must be provided with the necessary equipment and supplies to make sure that their job is done with the least possible injury to them. Sometimes people come, and I'm not even speaking about the QH because I'm speaking about all the health facilities, the polyclinics or whatever. Just 2 days ago in my office, a number of nurses from a polyclinic, and I will not call which one, I don't want to make anybody panic now, but they are in fear of their lives because they are not getting the necessary equipment and supplies. As a matter of fact, they told me that the doctor in the clinic had to go to the supermarket and buy bleach to use inside the clinic to clean down surfaces. That particular clinic did not even have the necessary basic cleaning supplies. We must make sure not only the facility at St. Lucie is up and running, but sometimes when these people turn up at the clinic, they have no idea that they're going to be treated for COVID or anything, or they don't know what they have. And when you get there, these nurses will be exposed, and you cannot expose them in circumstances where they do not have the basic equipment. We also have public health nurses who go out to visit people in their homes and to treat them in their homes. And I am also urging that they are provided with the necessary, the basic stuff, and not have to buy it for themselves because they buy Lysol to take with them. This is a fact of life in Barbados today. So, you see, COVID is not the only disease that happens. All other diseases are not put on hold because we have COVID in the air. Well, they say it's not in the air, it's not airborne, but you know what I mean. Right? So we must still provide our health professionals with the necessary stuff to do their work and as I said, with the least injury or the likelihood of injury to themselves. That's all I'm asking. Yes, we must supply the facilities that we are now equipping, but we have other facilities that are long-standing and running that where people will go, and they must have the necessary equipment and supplies to do their job. That's all I'm asking. Don't forget them. Don't concentrate everything on COVID-19, forgetting that we have other diseases, other things that can take us out. So that's all I have to say, sir, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I will be brief. Mr. Deputy President, what we need to be certain of is that the lines of communication for all are open. And we must not be afraid to use telemedicine. And there has been a change in the legislation, telemedicine. Yes, Mr. Deputy President. The day has come when persons, because of pre-existing illnesses and possibly symptoms that might suggest COVID-19, people should be able, with available technology, cell phones, to call a friend, a doctor, and speak to them, and possibly share information. So one doesn't have to arrive at a house at 6 in the morning to find out that you might be at risk if you went in, if you made a phone call. I'm not suggesting that everyone has a phone, but we have to use the available technology. And it is important that all persons who are participating in this war be issued with the essential and necessary protective equipment at all levels. There's no point trying to save persons who have unfortunately contracted the coronavirus, but losing important staff, whether you are a driver of an ambulance or a doctor. So we have to make sure that what we said earlier about being our brother's keepers is real. And that applies, Mr. Deputy President, not only to the doctors and nurses, but the patients thinking about the doctor who will come or the nurse who will come. We have to be, I notice Senator Holder is smiling, we have to truly be our brother's keepers. Enough can't be said. I think that hopefully when this is over, we would have learned. I pray that our curve will never take off. But the only way to flatten the curve is just everybody is aware. And just like Senator Franklin said, everybody appeals on behalf of everyone else all the time. And we have to be thinking about the other person all the time. Mr. Deputy President, I'm obliged to you.
Senator Haynes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Deputy President and colleagues. I will not be lengthy this afternoon because I had the opportunity to speak to COVID already for the week, but I just wanted to speak to a delicate balancing act that has to go on. On Monday, I would have spoken to the balancing act that any decision maker around the world has to take right now, where they have to juggle the responsibility of people's lives and livelihoods and weigh it against the greater national interest in the face of a public health crisis. Another balancing act that is going on from country to country is that of balancing the caseload of diseases against what is being called capacity. Some may have heard the term flattening the curve. It basically is, it's probably going to be the phrase of the year for 2020, flatten the curve, flatten the curve. Basically what that speaks to is ensuring that the number of cases at any point in time does not exceed the ability of your particular healthcare system to deal with the cases. And as I alluded to on Monday, we've seen the cracks start to show in even the most sophisticated health systems in the world. In the Barbadian context, we've seen efforts being made from as far back as January, not only to identify, but to build out capacity. So everyone would have heard of the Enmore facility, the Enmore isolation facility, which is a specialized care facility which is intended to look after people who are sick and require medical attention. 6 beds there. Capacity at the BDF Field Hospital. Also capacity at the Edna Nichols Center in St. Lucie, Harrison's Point, Paragon. Efforts have been made from about 3 months ago to identify and also start to build out capacity. And this is something that is crucial and that people really need to understand. Because let's say case in point, we look at New York City. I read an article this morning that spoke to the fact that the Javits Center, which is a 1 million square foot facility where my sister and her husband went to see the International Automotive Show, being converted now to a makeshift hospital, a 1 million square foot facility being converted to a hospital. We saw a makeshift morgue being set up in a tent in the middle of New York City. Just an indication that what this country faces in the coming weeks has to be taken with all seriousness. The statistics indicate that yes, most cases are mild, but we still must be able to treat to those who develop severe or critical illness. Indications are that what we call the ventilatory capacity, basically it's a respiratory illness, so should your lungs fail, you might need to have a machine to help you to breathe. People who contract COVID that fall into that critical risk category are typically spending 3 to 4 times longer on a ventilator than for normal illnesses. To that end, I'm very, very pleased at the approach that the government has taken in not just identifying capacity and actively building out capacity. From what I've been made to understand, workmen have been down at Harrison's Point from about 2-3 weeks ago, working around the clock, 24/7. From the first time that the Prime Minister toured the facility, I understood that within 24 hours, both the light and water were put back on. So there's tireless work going on that end. And in addition to that, resources are being identified, not just financial resources, but human resource capacity. Because what is a ventilator if there's no one to operate it? So I was also very, very heartened to hear that the doctors who, like myself and Dr. Maynard and Dr. Walcott, who are familiar with the challenges that our health system faces, can look forward to getting some support from Cuban healthcare workers. I don't want to be lengthy, but I want to take an opportunity to commend the staff, all levels of staff in healthcare, because often we think of doctors and nurses. There's ancillary staff, maids who have to go clean the floors, wipe down the bed railings. You know, this public health crisis is also helping us to kind of recontextualize how we see work. Because in the bill that passed not too long ago, garbage men, garbage collection, supermarket workers were just deemed as essential services. So all work matters. And I just want to take an opportunity to reiterate to the public that we have sought to create a parallel path through which anyone who's suspected of having COVID-19 can access health care, hopefully in a way that will not impact other patients or healthcare workers in the traditional healthcare system. If you have signs or symptoms of COVID-19, the ideal thing to do is to call ahead, whether you call your doctor, whether you call A&E, or you call a private emergency facility. Just don't show up. Call first, especially if you have respiratory symptoms. Because over the telephone, what they're able to do based on your history, your symptoms, is to do a triage and tell you whether, yes, you fit the profile of some person who can come here and safely access care without jeopardizing the health of other patients or healthcare workers, or whether it is preferable for you to take the parallel pathway that we've created for patients who think that they might have COVID-19. So I have been a very, very somber mood for the entire week, because having worked in the QEH and seeing it even on its best days, you know, we know what pressure feels like. But we as Barbadians, we still have the capacity to contain this thing. And I'll once again reinforce the importance of each of us understanding our personal responsibility in terms of our hand washing, our hygiene, our respiratory etiquette, not just as something that's important to ourselves, but something that's important to the wider community. Thank you, Mr. Deputy President.
Senator Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I just rise to make a really brief contribution. And this is to do with the facilities that we're speaking about here this evening. The government has tried their best to ensure that we look out for not just the patients, because clearly the patients that may go to these facilities, whether those that are ill, those that are not ill, and those are just in quarantine. Because you must remember there are two different aspects to this. There are people who go to these facilities for quarantine purposes, so they are not ill, but we're not sure, so we put them there to be able to assess them to see what perhaps may be wrong with them. Then there are those that go to a facility where they go into isolation because they are ill, and so they must be kept away from other people so they do not then infect them and then cause infection all over the place. But once you go into one of these facilities, regardless of what your condition may be, it then stops your family and your loved ones and people who care about you from being able to interact with you. They're not able to interact with you in any way whatsoever. They cannot visit you because if you are ill, clearly they can't. If you're not ill but just in quarantine, the same applies, because we would not want for that person to perhaps infect anyone if they were to become so. And as we know, this virus is transmissible without a person having visible signs of the illness. So in order for those individuals within the facility to not feel isolated, because being in any place where you're alone, there are emotional aspects to that, and certainly mental aspects to being alone. So we have had all the facilities outfitted with entertainment, with multi-choice television, so they'll be able to have something to watch. We have also outfitted the facilities with the ability for people to get onto the internet. So one, they're able to, if they have the cell phone or any kind of device that gives them the ability to get on the internet, so any smartphone will do it, tablet, iPad, computers, etc. But it also gives them the opportunity as well to communicate with their loved ones who cannot come to visit them. Because anytime someone is somewhere and they're not with their family and their family not able to communicate with them, they will be concerned themselves, and that could lend to stress levels that we can reduce by doing what anyone would do within those circumstances, and that is to allow them a methodology, a mode to be able to communicate, as I said, with their family and loved ones. So the government has ensured that these facilities are outfitted with this type of technology for the benefit of these individuals and for their comfort. And I think that that is a good thing. The final thing I want to say, Mr. Deputy President, is that I, like all Barbadians, I'm very appreciative to all of the people in the healthcare sector. I don't think people understand the long hours that people in the healthcare sector normally work. And that is under normal conditions. When they're just working within the hospital, people come in there with, broken foot, whatever it is they come there for. But in a situation like this, what is expected of them is even greater. Long hours. Of course, there's also the additional stress of having to be careful and what have you, and all the other factors that go with it. They themselves have family and so on. And so I really, like most Barbadians, must say how appreciative I am to all of the people in the healthcare sector, all the nurses, the doctors, people like orderlies and just anyone working within that environment. And I'm ever so grateful that those workers have continued to show their love for their country, their love for their jobs and their profession, and their love for people. Because without that, it is difficult to work within that sector. And I, for one, am extremely appreciative of it, and I would like to thank all of them. And with that, Mr. Deputy President, I'm obliged to you.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank honourable members for their contributions in this short debate. Just want to assure the honourable leader on the other side of the opposition that government is mindful of his concerns, and indeed we're making provisions. We've received some of the protective clothing that we've required, and we've ordered a substantial amount of it, which we expect to come within the next coming weeks. I don't know how we would have fared in getting it here if we had indeed closed our entire borders to everyone else, as had been suggested earlier by an honourable member. Mr. President, I don't want to go over what we've said. I think everybody recognizes what is being done at these facilities and government's commitment in terms of the outfitting of these facilities and providing equipment as we need it. As was said earlier, we're going to be we've had discussions with the Cuban government in terms of the provision of nurses and medical personnel to assist us in the not too distant future. I also want to add my special commendation for those